Hi everybody, my name is Ben Curro and I'm the head physio of the Redlands United senior men's team. Today I'm going to be delivering a short presentation on common injuries that we tend to see on the football field, particularly at the junior level, and to give some advice on recovery strategies. So I thought I'd start with a brief overview on what physiotherapists actually do, as I'm sure some of you have been lucky enough to avoid us up to this point. We treat a range of conditions affecting people from all ages. More commonly though, we deal with musculoskeletal conditions, which basically means injuries that affect bones, muscles and ligaments. Okay? As sport involves placing a lot of stress on these structures, we tend to have a big role to play. I've put here in this slide our clinic details, so if any of you have any questions or concerns and need a physiotherapy consult, feel free to give us a look online or give us a call. So initially what we're going to go through is just some common injuries that we tend to see. There's a list of them there, we'll go through them one by one. The first condition we're going to go through is called Sever's disease, which is also known as an apophysitis. So at the end of our long bones, before we reach skeletal maturity, we have these little growth plates which are made of cartilage. They close when we're fully grown and turn to bone. Apophysitis implies that there's inflammation at these growth plates, and this is often caused by repetitive stress to these areas. With Sever's, it's to do with the growth plate in the heel bone and the Achilles tendon. The repetitive stress which causes pain here tends to be in the form of high impact activities such as running and jumping, so it's common that we get these in soccer, and it commonly affects boys from the ages of 10 to 15 and girls from 8 to 13. So the way that we manage Sever's disease, it's largely a self-limiting condition, which means until those growth plates fuse, which can take up to 2 years, it's really about managing how much load we're putting through the tendon onto the bone to prevent that stress and reduce that pain and inflammation. So we can do that by reducing your training volume and intensities. We can restrict game time where possible, and we can also cut out some of those high impact activities like jumping and sprinting and things like that. It's important we don't completely stop though, because we don't want to decondition. We want to keep using those muscles, but just not pushing it beyond its tolerable level. Other ways is through the RICE principle to manage your pain. So rest, ice, compress and elevate. They're all really important. And we can also sometimes take some anti-inflammatories, which if you're not sure of, talk to a pharmacist or a GP, but they can often help reduce that pain and inflammation. The other thing is exercise as well. So we know that if we can improve the strength and capacity of those tissues around your ankle, but all the way up the chain as well, we can better prepare those tissues for being able to tolerate the loads we're putting through it and then therefore reduce your pain as well. Sometimes podiatry can also be good, and I'll let Costa talk to you about that. So the next condition we're going to talk about is another growth-related one, and it's called Osgood-Schlatt's disease. And this is similar to Sever's in the sense that it is an apophysitis, but it occurs in a different part of the body around the knee. And it's basically where the patellar tendon, which is the tendon of that big quad muscle that comes down the front of your thigh, attaches on the top of your shin bone. Okay, and that growth plate is what sits at the top of the shin bone there, known as your tibia. Again, it's through repetitive stress, and often, like with Sever's, it'll be running, your high impact type activities, so jumping and as well, and sometimes even kicking. And again, affects similar age groups with boys and girls. In order to manage this condition, very much like Sever's, so your RICE principles apply, as does your load management. So essentially, you'll often come in for physiotherapy, we'll get you started on a bit of a rehab program, and then it'll just be the touch base from time to time to see how you're going and make sure that we're working under that load threshold before we start to bring on pain. Okay, so this next one, I'm sure a lot of you have had them in the past, ankle sprains. We often get these when we're changing direction and we go over on the ankle, or if we get a bit of a knock in, a bit of a challenge. So there's multiple ways we can sprain the ankle. The most common is when we get injuries to the ligaments around the outside of the ankle. And more commonly, it'll be a low-grade ankle sprain that you'll pick up, which we have a little bit of a grading scale there to determine how much damage has been done to those structures. And often that'll coincide with varying timelines for when you get back on the football pitch. So often initially we want to try and immobilize and rest to allow those ligaments to sort of heal up, and then we want to start to make sure we get into a good rehab program to prevent this from happening again, because once you've had one ankle sprain, your risk of multiple ones goes up. So it's really important you stick the rehab out to work on strength and balance, and a graduated return to your football. The only other one I'll mention there too is a high ankle sprain, which you don't see quite as often, but that's a bit more of a severe injury, and it often involves the ligaments a bit higher up in the ankle that hold your shin bones together, and that can often mean more time on the sidelines. The next type of injury we'll talk through are muscle tears. These are very common, just like ankle sprains, and they account for up to 30% of the total injuries that professional footballers get. So it's not just the juniors that get them, we're all prone to muscle tears. And essentially we also grade those like we do with ankle sprains. So we talk about how much damage has been caused, and then that will let us know how long we're going to be on the sidelines for. So again, with managing these injuries, it's about early rest to allow those tissues, once we've torn them, to scar back up. And then we want to start to make sure we strengthen them so that we don't tear them again. So the last injury we're going to briefly talk about is called a muscle contusion, or it's also known as a cork, which I'm sure a lot of you have had, which is where we get a bit of an impact to the area, either through a knee or an ankle, and it causes a fair amount of pain, and it's basically bleeding within the muscle. So it'll often not mean you're going to miss any game time, but it can just be quite uncomfortable to play through. So it's good when we get a cork to come off at the end of the game, get some ice on it. So it helps if you can ice it in a bit of a lengthened position. So if we cork the quad, for example, if you bend the knee up slightly, get the ice on in that position, it just stops us from stiffening up too much. It's also important we don't massage through this area after we've received a knock, because there's been disruption to some of the blood vessels, so we want to let that heal, and we don't want to be putting a lot of pressure through it. Alright, so we've gone through some of the common injuries that we tend to find in football. Now I'm going to go through a couple of recovery strategies, and we'll start with injury prevention programs. They're really, really important. They're essentially programs that are designed to help better prepare the bodies for sport, and they're a combination of balance, strength and agility type exercises, which I think we should all be doing. I've actually got the senior guys doing a bit of a modified version of it that they do on a Monday night recovery. On top of that, I'd like them to do it before training and games as well. And that takes roughly about 20 minutes to complete. So talk to your coaches, jump online. The FIFA 11 Plus and the 11 Plus for kids are what we're looking for here. And they're pretty straightforward exercises to go through. Not only do they help improve performance in sport, but they also reduce the risk of injury, which is so important when we've got a very long season in football. Okay, so a few other things to think about with recovery. Fatigue is a big one. It often is where injuries occur, and it's usually towards the end of the first and the second half. So identifying how tired you're feeling can sometimes be good in picking up a risk of injury. So if you're feeling really, really shattered towards the end of a first half or a second half, have a talk to your coach about maybe having a bit of a breather. Load management again, so we've spoken about that before. A lot of those injuries occur because we're overloading structures. So thinking about how much we're doing on a weekly basis, if you're thinking about school, club, rep type football, and also tournaments as well. So when we do a whole lot in a short amount of time, so a 3 or 4 day tournament, we're going to get a higher risk of injury. Rehabilitation is another one. So when you do have an injury, it is so critical that you see that rehab out to make sure you're ready to go back to sport without the risk, or with a lowered risk, I should say, of causing another injury. And the last thing is screenings, which we haven't been able to put in place this year because we kind of came on a little bit late into the season. But essentially these are where we screen players at the start of the year to find out any factors that might make them a little bit of a higher risk of injury, and we try and get them onto a bit of a program to address those issues and reduce the risk of injury. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about fluid intake. Now we know that when we're running around playing sport, the body heats up, and in order to cool itself down, it sweats out a lot of body fluids, okay? This means we lose a lot of water from the body, which if we lose too much, we can be at risk of dehydration, which is not only bad for our performance, but it can actually be bad for our health as well. So it's really important that we're staying hydrated. Now, when we drink electrolytes, it helps the body hold on to water, but water is also really important to be drinking as well. And it's important to not only do so before a game and before training, but also during and afterwards as well. So make sure you're drinking plenty of water. In terms of nutrition, it is important that we're eating a well-balanced diet. On game days and trainings as well, make sure if you're going to have a big meal, have it be at least 3 hours before kickoff, with a light snack about 1 or 2 hours before is fine. After the game, about half an hour is usually the time for a post-recovery meal. But if you have any specific questions regarding dietary requirements, I'd be talking to a dietitian or a nutritionist, as they're experts in that sort of area. So the last topic we're going to talk about is sleep. It's really important that you're getting at least 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. So the golden rule of thumb is about 8 hours. This not only reduces the risk of injury, but also illness as well. And that'll often affect your ability to play football. They've also found that impaired sleep also reduces performance, and we want to make sure we're at our absolute best before we're running out onto the football field. So make sure you're getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. There you go. Look, I know it's hard staying inside right now, not being able to play football. I'm sure you're all really missing it, but it is important that you try and stay as active as you can. So use this time while you're not playing to try and better yourself and improve. So go for runs around the neighborhood, jump on the bike, look up that FIFA 11 Plus program and get stuck into it. So the guys over at Allsports have organised some prehab packs that we are able to send out to those that need it, which basically includes your foam roller, your trigger ball, a TheraBand and a heavy resistance band as well. So if you're interested in those, I've got my details on the next slide. You can just get in contact with me and I'll be able to arrange that for you. It's just so important right now that we're not taking steps backwards, so that when we come out of this, when the season resumes, we're not playing catch up, we're ready and raring to go. So thank you all for watching. I hope you're able to get something out of the presentation today. If you had any questions at all regarding what we've gone through, feel free to contact me at the clinic on 33953777, or you can email me at the email address I've left on the last slide there. I hope you're all staying safe and enjoying time with your families, and I look forward to the day we get the all clear to go back to playing football again.